I have sat in the front row of the Alderton Grand Hall for going on 40 years, and I have learned, the hard way, more than once, that the most dangerous person in any concert room is the one nobody is watching. I learned it properly on a Friday evening in late October when a young woman named Nora Vane sat down at a Steinway concert grand and played Callum. Drew off his own stage, let me tell you how it happened. The hall was dressed for the regional finals gala, chandeliers at full blaze, every seat filled with the kind of audience that comes partly for the music and partly to be seen appreciating it. I was there in my usual capacity, retired adjudicator, head of the old board for longer than most of the evening's guests had been alive. My name is Edmund Farr, and I had a program in my lap and a glass of water on the armrest, and I was quite prepared for an agreeable, unremarkable evening. Callum Drayway was the headliner. That should tell you something about the mood in the room. He was the sort of pianist whose reputation arrived 15 minutes before he did. Young, celebrated, the kind of talent that knows it is a talent and never quite lets the room forget. He had won 2 international prizes before the age of 25 and played the proms the summer before last, and every music journalist in the region had spent the past decade assuring one another he was destined for greatness. He may well have been, but greatness and graciousness do not always travel together, and Callum Dray was the proof of it. Nora Vane, by contrast, was not on the program. She was the conservatory's senior accompanist, the woman who sat to the left of every soloist at every recital, who transposed at sight when a vocalist changed their mind at the last moment, who held the whole ensemble together from the bench while the soloist took the bow. She had been at the conservatory for 6 years. I had watched her play in perhaps 30 recitals. I had never in all that time heard anyone ask her to play alone. She was in her early 30s, with a kind of face that takes a moment to notice and then doesn't leave you, quiet, composed, with careful dark eyes that always seemed to be listening to something the rest of the room had missed. That evening she was in a plain charcoal dress, a glass of water in her hand, standing near the rear of the stage wing while the evening's finalists milled about in their formal wear. No one was talking to her. She didn't seem to mind. It was during the post-competition interval, while the audience was refilling their glasses, and the finalists were taking polite questions that Dre made his remark. He was holding court near the piano, naturally, and someone had asked him about sight reading, about the difference between a musician who interprets and one who merely follows. Drewa smiled the way people smile when they are about to say something they have rehearsed, but want to sound spontaneous. Interpretation requires a point of view, he said, loud enough to carry. An accompanist follows. It's a different category altogether. He let his gaze drift toward the stage wing where Nora was standing, and he smiled again, a fraction wider. No offense to those who've made a career of the second chair. The laughter was modest, but it was there, the polite sort that means people heard and are deciding whether to agree. Nora looked at him. Her expression didn't change. I don't take offense, she said. Her voice was calm and it carried the same easy precision as her playing, every word placed, nothing wasted. But I'm curious. You said interpretation requires a point of view. Do you think an accompanist can't have one? Dreway turned to face her fully. He seemed mildly amused, the way a chess grandmaster is amused when a stranger asks to play. I think it's possible, he said. I've simply never heard evidence of it. There was a small silence. I set down my program. Then perhaps you'd like to, Nora said. The room sharpened. I saw it happen. The quality of the attention in the hall shifted. The way it does when something real is about to occur, and people feel it before they understand it. Dreway glanced around at the audience and seemed to calculate that the moment suited him. He spread his hands in an easy gesture of invitation. By all means, he said. The stage is there. Give me something worth hearing, and I'll give you my honest assessment. Someone near the back of the hall said, Go on, then, and there was a ripple of laughter and a smattering of uncertain applause, and just like that, the thing was set. I will admit I was uneasy, not because I doubted Nora, I had heard her play enough to know she was extraordinary, but because I knew what a room like this did to a person who didn't perform alone. The loneliness of the stage is a different weight from the companionship of the bench. I had seen fine musicians freeze under it. I had seen good playing go to pieces when there was no soloist to anchor to, no score to follow, nothing but the keys and the silence and 2,000 square feet of gilded expectation. Nora walked to the piano without hurrying. She adjusted the bench by half an inch, which told me everything. She was precise, she was present, she was not afraid. She rested her hands in her lap for a moment and looked at the keys. The hall went very quiet. Then she began. She opened with something spare and unguarded, a simple descending line in the left hand, unhurried, almost conversational, the kind of passage a lesser ear might have dismissed as warming up. But it was not warming up. It was listening. Each phrase was a question laid down, then considered, then gently turned. I heard people around me lean forward. I heard the shift in the room's breathing. She was playing Liszt, the transcendental etude in F minor, one of the towering pieces of the repertoire, but she had entered it from a side door, from a quiet internal room that most pianists never found. Where others played it as a display of conquest, she played it as a conversation. The left hand laid the foundation, deep and unhurried. The right hand sang above it, and what it sang was not the notes alone, but the intention behind the notes, the feeling that had always lived beneath the architecture of the piece, waiting for someone to uncover it. I glanced at Drewey. He had picked up his program again, and it was in his hands, but he was not reading it. He was watching her. Something in his expression had already begun to shift, not yet humbled, but arrested, the way a man looks when something he expected to find small turns out to be large, and he is still deciding whether to revise his estimate. By the third minute, nobody in the hall was moving. I have attended concerts where the music was technically flawless, and the room remained politely unmoved. I have attended others, far rarer, where the music reached into the chest of every person listening and took hold of something there. This was the second kind. I don't know exactly when it happened, only that I became aware mid-phrase that my throat had tightened and that the woman seated to my left had pressed her fingers to her lips, and that somewhere behind me a man had inhaled sharply as if waking from a dream. Nora built the piece the way a tide builds, not by rushing, but by the relentless, unhurried accumulationities wait. The middle passages unfurled with a technical certainty that was almost frightening to witness from so close. Her hands moved across the keys with a quietness that made no sense given the volume she was drawing from that instrument, as though the piano itself was choosing to be loud, as though she had simply asked it, and it had agreed. The chords in the bass rang against the chandeliers. The upper register sang with a clarity that I can only describe as honest, the kind of sound that doesn't perform feeling but simply has it. She reached the climax of the etude and drove through it without hesitation, the long ascending runs clean and burning, the hammered chords at the peak of the phrase landing like something the room had been holding its breath toward without knowing it. And then she brought it back down, the way the best players always do, not with drama but with certainty, and ended on a chord that faded so slowly it seemed to become part of the air in the room rather than departing. The silence that followed was not the silence of an audience waiting to applaud. It was the silence of people who had forgotten for a moment that applause was a thing that happened. I was the first one on my feet. I am not generally a demonstrative man. 40 years of adjudication teaches you a certain professional reserve, but I was standing before I had decided to stand. And then the row around me was standing, and the row behind that, and by the time the applause came, it came all at once, the whole hall, the sound filling the space from floor to chandelier. I looked at Callum Drewey, who was standing near the piano, and he was still, genuinely still, the easy confidence of the previous hour quite gone from his face. He was looking at Nora with an expression I had seen on very few faces in 40 years of this work. It was the expression of a man who has been shown something he did not know existed, and who is honest enough, at bottom, to admit it. Nora rose from the bench. She did not look at Drewey, not at first. She looked at the keys for a moment with the private, gathered expression of someone closing a door carefully on their way out. Then she looked up at the hall, and she nodded once, a small, dignified acknowledgement, and stepped back from the piano. Drewey moved toward her through the applause. I watched him. He stopped in front of her and said something. I couldn't hear it over the room, but I saw her face, and I saw it soften, just slightly, and I saw her nod. And then Drewey did something I will never forget as long as I sit in these halls. He turned to the piano, straightened, and bowed to it, not to the audience, not to himself, but to the instrument that she had played. Then he turned back to the room and began to clap for her. He was the last to start and the loudest by the end, and his face had lost every trace of the polished performance it had worn all evening. What was underneath it was younger and less certain and considerably more worth looking at. I have told this story many times since, and people always want to know what he said to her afterward. I asked Nora once, at a conservatory board dinner, the following spring. She smiled at her glass of water, that careful, considered smile of hers, and said, "He told me he'd been in the wrong category all along. That interpretation isn't a point of view. It's a form of listening." She paused, and then she said, "And then he asked if I'd be willing to play a recital with him, as equals." I asked her if she had said yes. She looked at me with those quiet dark eyes, and she said, "I told him I'd think about it." People laugh at that part. I don't. Quite. I think she meant it, the thinking, the unhurried weighing of things. It was the same quality that had been in her playing. Nothing given away before it was ready. Nothing performed that hadn't first been felt. I heard from a colleague the following autumn that she had indeed agreed, and that the recital, the two of them, Nora and Drewe, named equal on the program for the first time, had sold out in under 4 hours. I did not attend. I have been to enough concerts in my life to know when a story has already given me what it has to give, and what the Alderton Grand Hall gave me that Friday evening was complete in itself. I did not need a sequel to it. What I needed, and what I have carried ever since, was the memory of that silence after the final chord. The way it sat in the room like something breathing. I don't know if she ever did. What I know is that the Alderton Grand Hall has a particular hush to it at the start of an evening, before the first note is played, when the chandeliers are up and the seats are filling, and the program is still folded and clean in your lap. It is a hush full of possibility. Most evenings, the music fills it well enough, and then the room empties, and you go home and you sleep, and it fades. Some evenings, the ones you carry the rest of your life, the music does something else. It opens a door you didn't know was there, and the room is not quite the same after, and neither are you. I have sat in the front row of this hall for going on 40 years. Nora Vaines gave me one of those evenings, and the man who dared her to gave it to her, and he will have the grace to know it until the end of his days. That in the end is the only score that matters.